With the highly anticipated remake of Resident Evil 4 just around the corner, let's look ahead at our options and consider what everyone would want for Capcom to remake next. But what should actually be next? Not to be confused with what Capcom is likely doing. Previously, before the Resident Evil 4 remake was announced, everyone had presumed we'd stick to the timeline of Resident Evil, and the obvious answer was Code Veronica. That didn't happen, and that ship has sailed. Capcom skipped ahead in the Resident Evil universe of storylines straight to the moneymaker and icon that is Resident Evil 4.
Sorry to have bothered.
This wasn't necessarily a huge shock, as Code Veronica isn't in the same stratosphere of relevance that Resident Evil 4 is in. Not trying to pick a fight between the two, but Resident Evil 4 has been regarded as, I'll be nice and say, roughly a top 100 game all time. While Code Veronica did a lot worse in sales, originally at first it was limited to just the Dreamcast, which was the least profitable system at the time. A lot of reason for Code Veronica to not be Capcom's first choice and what to remake at the time. So is it logical that after the heavy hitter that is Resident Evil 4, comes Code Veronica next? Don't necessarily bank on that. Quite honestly, how far does Capcom actually go with remakes? At what point is it overdone and time to be original in content finally? There's definitely a remake endpoint coming. It would probably be smarter to end this new Resident Evil timeline after Resident Evil 5 or 6 get remade and move on to different things. Won't happen though, because Resident Evil is too financially successful and Capcom is already overly greedy. For all we know, Resident Evil 4 Remake is the end of remakes, but that seems highly unlikely. So if Capcom has too many concerns and thinks Code Veronica is too much of a risk, would they go right to remaking Resident Evil 5? I also haven't mentioned the fact that Resident Evil 1 and 0 could also get remade. It would be amazing to see Resident Evil 1 remade in the gameplay style that is the current lineup of remakes, but it also poses some issues with it being mostly just set in a mansion with tight hallways and a lot more puzzles. It'd likely feel like a very different experience and be a short game, kind of like the Resident Evil 3 remake was. Resident Evil 0 has the same kind of issues that Code Veronica does. Maybe even more so, because at least Code Veronica has Claire, Chris, and Wesker in it. Resident Evil 0 just has Rebecca and Billy, who is a character Capcom has essentially forgotten about. We do know that based on current intel, Capcom may be releasing more than one Resident Evil Universe game next year. Resident Evil 9 probably being one of the two. Resident Evil 5 Remake would have to be much farther out, as it's a very lengthy game as well, so that's probably unlikely to be included next year. We do also have the Capcom data breach that happened over a year ago, which revealed that Resident Evil Outbreak, Revelations 3, and a game likely codenamed Hank for a game centered on the Resident Evil 2 character, Hunk. Apocalypse was also revealed here, but that's likely just code for Resident Evil 9, so that's a non-factor here. I did ask what should Capcom remake, and I've pointed out several reasons what seems likely that they will do. Capcom should have remade Code Veronica before they remade Resident Evil 4. Absolutely. Remaking it after 4 is weird for the timeline, but since it's new and the two games don't connect much originally, it's not a big ordeal. Problem comes if Capcom decides to disregard it entirely and go right to remaking Resident Evil 5. That would be a death sentence to about any chance of ever getting Code Veronica remade. It has huge connections to Resident Evil 5. It's a damn borderline prequel to the game, continuing the arc of Chris vs. Wesker, and Resident Evil 5 ending that arc. The Resident Evil 2 remake already has a moment of Claire mentioning that Chris left to Europe for the setup for Code Veronica. In a letter that he left in the RPD, she acknowledged didn't sound like Chris, either wrote it or left the impression that something was wrong. Capcom laid the foundation for the go-ahead to make Code Veronica, but decided against it so far. I've only mentioned Resident Evil because that's the most logical response. I'd argue there's a game from another franchise that has needed a remake for longer than anything else Capcom could remake at this point. Dino Crisis. The fact that Capcom is in fact making a dinosaur-themed game is gut-punching to say the least. Exoprimal, a new IP unrelated to Dino Crisis, is coming soon. I think the majority of gaming would have preferred a remake of Dino Crisis instead, but hey, maybe Exoprimal sounds better to you. What should Capcom remake next? I think your response might be where your nostalgia lies, or which Resident Evil out of Resident Evil 0, 1, Code Veronica, or 5 matters the most to you. Resident Evil 5 is likely the most profitable remake Capcom could do next. I'd say it also is the remake that would have the most work to be done out of those options, and by that I mean the setting in Africa, the story being a bit too over the top compared to every other Resident Evil basically, and just the style the game is in with co-op. That in itself is a big departure from the remakes of 2, 3, and 4. What do you think they remake next? Let me know in the comments, as well as what remake you want them to remake most. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time on Hittobox.